There's a kind of love that looks like care, but it actually creates monsters. And most families practice this kind of love without having any idea what they're doing. Carl Jung spent decades studying how families destroy their children's psyches through something that seems like kindness, and what he discovered is deeply disturbing. Conditional love doesn't come with warning labels. It doesn't involve violence. It doesn't leave visible scars. It comes disguised as caring, as concern, as wanting what's best for the child, but the effect is devastating. In this video, I'm going to show you the 5 invisible forms of conditional love that families practice without realizing it, and how each one creates a narcissistic wound that will define the child's entire adult life. If you really want to understand how narcissists are created, stick around until the end, because what I'm about to reveal will completely change how you view your own childhood. Hold on, because before I show you the 5 types, I need to explain what happens in a child's mind when they receive conditional love. Jung discovered something that most psychologists still ignore today. In the first 7 years of life, a child lives in something he called mystical participation. This means they can't separate who they are from who their parents are. They absorb everything, as if it were their own. When a child receives unconditional love, they internalize the message that they exist, that they are valid, that they deserve to be here, simply for being who they are. But when love comes with conditions, the message is completely different. The child learns that they are only loved when they do certain things, when they behave in a certain way, when they hide certain parts of themselves. And here's the problem. The child makes an impossible choice. They can maintain connection with who they really are, what Jung called the true self, or they can maintain connection with their parents, who guarantee their survival. They always choose survival. And in that moment, something catastrophic happens. The true self goes into the shadow, and an adaptive false self takes over. This false self is a construction, a persona that exists only to please, to perform, to survive. It's not who the child really is. It's who they needed to pretend to be, to receive scraps of love. Now let me show you the 5 forms of conditional love that create this split. The first form is love based on performance. This is the most common and the most invisible type. The child realizes very early on that their parents are happy when they get good grades, when they win competitions, when they stand out, when they do something that the parents can show off to other people, and they realize that the parents are distant, disappointed, or annoyed when they fail, when they don't stand out, when they're just a normal child doing normal things. The message the child absorbs is clear. I am loved for what I do, not for who I am. Jung documented impressive cases of adults who spent their entire lives trying to perform better, believing that they would finally be loved. But no matter how much they achieved, the emptiness was never filled, because the wound wasn't about lack of achievements. It was about lack of love for the true self. Let me tell you about a case that illustrates this perfectly. A woman named Ashley came to therapy at 42 years old. She was extremely successful, a director at a multinational company. She earned more money than she could spend. She had professional recognition. She had everything that society says means success, but she was empty. She said that since childhood, she only received attention when she brought home awards, when she got straight A's, when she won something. On ordinary days, when she was just a girl wanting to play, wanting attention, wanting cuddles, the parents were busy, distant, indifferent. Ashley learned that existing wasn't enough. She needed to produce to deserve love. And she spent 40 years producing, achieving, performing. But she never felt loved, because what she really wanted wasn't recognition. It was to be seen for who she was, and that never happened. Hold on, because the second form of conditional love is even more subtle. It's love based on emotional behavior. In this pattern, the child learns that certain emotions are accepted and others are forbidden. Anger is forbidden. Sadness is forbidden. Fear is forbidden. Sometimes even excessive joy is forbidden. When the child expresses a forbidden emotion, they receive rejection. The parents pull away. They get angry. They punish in some way. When the child expresses only permitted emotions, they receive approval. The message the child absorbs is devastating. Parts of me are unacceptable. I need to hide who I really am to be loved. Jung explained that this creates a fragmentation of the psyche. The child divides themselves between acceptable parts that remain in consciousness and unacceptable parts that go into the shadow. The problem is that the parts in the shadow don't disappear. They remain there, accumulating energy, waiting to explode. And when they explode, the person doesn't understand where it came from. It seems like it's not them. It seems like another person, because in a way, it is another person. It's the repressed part that finally found a breach. Let me tell you about Michael. Michael came to therapy because he had uncontrollable anger attacks. He was a gentle, polite, successful man, but every now and then, without warning, he would explode, he would shout, he would break things. Then he would deeply regret it and not understand what had happened. In the investigation of his childhood, we discovered the pattern. Michael's father was a man who hated any expression of anger. When young Michael got angry, his father would become icy. He would pull away. Sometimes he would go days without speaking to him. Michael learned very early on that anger was dangerous. Anger meant losing his father's love. Anger was unacceptable, so he buried the anger for 35 years, layer upon layer upon layer. But the anger didn't die. It stayed in the shadow, accumulating energy. And when it finally found a breach, it exploded with force disproportionate to the situation. Michael wasn't having anger attacks. He was releasing 35 years of repressed anger. The therapeutic work was slow. He needed to learn to feel anger in small doses, to express it before it accumulated, to integrate the shadow instead of repressing it. But hold on, because the third form of conditional love is the most confusing of all. It's love based on being the opposite of the parents. In this pattern, the parents project onto the child everything they hate in themselves, and they love the child only when they are the opposite of that. The father who hates his own weakness loves the child only when he is strong. A mother who resents her own dependence only loves her daughter when she is independent. A father who hates his own sensitivity only loves his son when he is tough. The child absorbs the message that certain parts of the human experience are so unacceptable that they need to be eliminated, and she dedicates herself to eliminating these parts in herself. The problem is, she's eliminating legitimate parts of what it means to be human. Weakness is part of the human experience. Dependence is part of it. Sensitivity is part of it. By trying to eliminate these parts, the child psychologically mutilates herself. Carl Jung called this the amputation of the psyche, and the result is an incomplete adult, rigid, unable to access entire parts of themselves. Let me tell you about Mark. Mark came to therapy at 48 years old because he couldn't cry, literally. Even in the saddest situations, even when he wanted to, even when he felt he needed to, the tears simply wouldn't come. In our investigation, we discovered that Mark's father had an unspoken rule. Men don't cry. when little Mark cried. His father showed contempt, not with cruel words, just with a look, a withdrawal, a coldness that clearly communicated that crying was unacceptable. Mark learned to block the crying, and over time, he blocked it so completely that he lost access to this basic emotional function. He spent 40 years without crying, and with that, he spent 40 years without being able to process grief, loss, sadness in a healthy way. Everything stayed accumulated, compacted, with no way out. The therapeutic work was about unlocking this function, giving permission to cry. And when Mark finally cried for the first time in decades, he cried for hours. He was releasing 40 years of repressed tears. Hold on, because the fourth form of conditional love is perhaps the most damaging of all. It's transactional love. In this pattern, love literally functions as a business transaction. The child gives something and receives love in return. When they stop giving, the love stops coming. Some parents demand obedience in exchange for love. Others demand emotional caretaking. Others demand that the child be the fulfillment of the dreams they never achieved. Whatever the currency, the message is the same. Love isn't given freely. Love is bought. Love is a transaction. The child learns that relationships are exchanges, that nobody gives anything for free, that she always needs to be offering something to deserve connection, and this becomes the foundation of all adult relationships. Let me tell you about Michelle. Michelle came to therapy at 37 years old because she couldn't accept gifts, literally. When someone gave her something, she became anxious, uncomfortable, immediately thinking about what she needed to give in return. In our investigation, we discovered the pattern. Michelle's mother was a woman who turned motherhood into a list of debts. Every single thing she did for her child was recorded, remembered, demanded payment for. I gave you milk. I gave you clothes. I raised you. You owe me. Michelle grew up feeling that she owed her existence, that she needed to pay it back, that love was a bill that never stopped being paid. And this extended to all relationships. She couldn't receive anything without calculating what she owed in return. Couldn't accept kindness without suspecting ulterior motives. Couldn't simply be loved, because for her, love wasn't something you received. It was something you bought, repeatedly, forever. Now I'm going to reveal the fifth and final form of conditional love, and this is the most invisible of all. It's love based on keeping the peace. In this pattern, the child learns that they are only loved when they don't cause problems, when they don't have needs, when they don't demand anything, when they are invisible. The parents aren't abusive, they aren't cruel, they are just overwhelmed, stressed, too busy to deal with a child who has normal needs. And the child perceives it. Perceives that when she asks for attention, the parents get irritated. Perceives that when she expresses needs, the parents sigh, complain, show that she is a burden. The message that the child absorbs is devastating. My needs are a problem. I am a problem. The only way to be loved is to disappear, and the child learns to disappear, not physically, psychologically. She stops asking, stops expressing, stops existing as a being with its own needs. Carl Jung documented that these children frequently develop what he called inverted narcissism. They don't seek attention in a grandiose way. They seek approval through disappearance, through not causing problems, through being the easiest person in the world to live with. And behind this facade of ease, there is an immense void. A person who never learned that their needs are valid, who never learned that it is permitted to occupy space, who never learned that they exist. Let me tell you about Brittany. Brittany came to therapy at 35 years old because she had relationships where she was always exploited. Narcissistic partners chose her repeatedly. Friends took advantage of her. Co-workers pushed responsibilities onto her, and she couldn't say no. In our investigation, we discovered the pattern. Brittany was the middle child in a family with 5 girls. The parents worked too much, were always tired, always stressed, always on the edge. Brittany realized very early on that the siblings who demanded attention were seen as problems. They were criticized. They were a source of even more stress for the already overwhelmed parents. So Brittany decided to be the perfect daughter, the one who never asked for anything, the one who solved her own problems, the one who helped with the younger siblings, the one who disappeared, and it worked. The parents praised her for being easy, for not being a burden, for being independent. But the price was immense. Brittany learned that her needs were invisible, that asking was wrong, that she only had value when she didn't cause problems, and she spent 35 years disappearing, in relationships where partners ignored her, in friendships where she was used, in jobs where she was exploited. Because for Brittany, existing as a being with its own needs was dangerous. It was being rejected. It was losing love. Now that you know the 5 forms of conditional love, I need to tell you something even more important. These forms rarely appear in isolation. Most families practice combinations of them, and the more forms combined, the deeper the wound. A child can receive love based on performance, and transactional love, and love based on keeping the peace. Each additional layer of conditionality deepens the message that the true self is unacceptable. And here comes the most disturbing part. Parents who practice conditional love almost never realize they're doing it. They genuinely believe they're loving their children, that they're doing the best they can, that they're preparing their children for the world, because they themselves were raised with conditional love. They don't know any other way to love. They're simply replicating what they learned. Carl Jung called this the generational transmission of complexes. The pattern passes from generation to generation, automatically, without consciousness. The grandparent who was raised with love based on performance creates the parent with love based on performance, who creates the child with love based on performance. Each generation thinks it's doing something different, but beneath the surface, the pattern is the same, and the pattern only breaks when someone wakes up, when someone becomes conscious, when someone chooses to do things differently. Hold on, because now I'm going to show you how conditional love specifically creates narcissism. Remember when I talked about the split between the true self and the false self? When a child receives conditional love, they develop a false self that meets the conditions. This false self is a construction, a mask, a persona that exists to guarantee love. Over time, the child completely identifies with this mask. They forget it's a mask. They forget that anything exists beneath it. And here is the mechanism of narcissism. The narcissist doesn't have a solid self. They have an inflated false self that needs constant validation to maintain itself. Without external validation, the mask begins to fall. And beneath the mask, there is a terrifying void. All the classic characteristics of narcissism make sense when you understand this. The constant need for admiration. That's because the mask needs external fuel to maintain itself. The inability to handle criticism. That's because criticism threatens the mask and exposes the void beneath. The lack of empathy. That's because empathy requires connection with the true self, which is buried in the shadows. The grandiosity. That's because the inflation compensates for the void. The transactional relationship. That's because the person only knows love as a transaction. Narcissism isn't a moral choice. It's not malice. It's not a character defect. It's a survival adaptation to a childhood where love came with conditions. But hold on, because there's more. Carl Jung discovered that there are different types of narcissism depending on how the child adapted to conditional love. The first type is grandiose narcissism. This type arises when the child managed to meet the conditions most of the time. They received enough validation to develop an inflated and seemingly successful false self. This narcissist seems confident, successful, charming. Beneath the surface, there's the same void, but the mask is solid. The second type is covert or vulnerable narcissism. This type arises when the child failed to meet the conditions. They didn't get the validation. The false self failed to inflate. This narcissist seems insecure, victimized, hypersensitive to rejection. Beneath the surface, there's the same wound, but the mask is different. The third type is inverted narcissism. This type arises when the child learned that the only way to receive love was to disappear. They became the opposite of the classic narcissist. This narcissist seeks out narcissists to serve. They find value in orbiting grandiose people. They define themselves by their relationship with the other person, never by themselves. All three types have the same root: conditional love in childhood, splitting of the self, adaptive false self, void at the core. The manifestations are different. The wound is the same. Now I'm going to show you the 7 signs that you were raised with conditional love. First sign: you constantly seek validation. Before making decisions, you need to know what others will think. You don't trust your own judgment. You need external confirmation to feel secure. Second sign: you have difficulty receiving. When someone gives you something, you feel uncomfortable. You immediately think about what you need to give in return. You can't accept kindness without suspicion. Third sign: you constantly perform. You feel like you always need to be interesting, useful, productive. You don't allow yourself to simply exist. Rest causes you anxiety. Fourth sign: you have difficulty with criticism. Any criticism, no matter how small, deeply destabilizes you. You feel like you're being rejected at your core. The criticism feels like confirmation that you're inadequate. Fifth sign: you attract transactional relationships. Your relationships feel like exchanges. You give something, you receive something. You feel like you need to deserve connection. Unconditional love feels suspicious. Sixth sign: you feel empty. No matter how much success you have, no matter how many achievements, there's a persistent void. Nothing fills it. Nothing is enough. You're always looking for the next thing that will finally make you feel complete. Seventh sign: you don't know who you are. When someone asks you what you want, you don't know. You know what you should want. You know what others want you to want. But what you really want is a mystery. If you recognized yourself in 3 or more of these signs, you were probably raised with conditional love. And you're probably carrying a narcissistic wound that affects every aspect of your life. Now, I'm going to show you the path to healing. Carl Jung was very clear about this. The healing doesn't come from changing your parents. It doesn't come from finally getting the unconditional love you never had. It doesn't come from external achievements. The healing comes from within. It comes from a process that Carl Jung called individuation. And this process has specific steps. The first step is recognition. You need to recognize viscerally, not just intellectually, that you were raised with conditional love. You need to feel the pain of this wound. You need to allow it to exist. Many people get stuck here. They resist recognition because it implies that their parents failed, and that feels like betrayal. It feels like ingratitude. But recognizing isn't blaming. It's simply seeing reality as it was. Your parents probably did the best they could with what they had, and yet what they had wasn't enough. Both things can be true at the same time. The second step is mourning. You need to mourn what you never had. For the child who just wanted to be loved for who they were, for the true self that was buried to survive. This mourning is painful. It can last months or years, but it's necessary, because you can't build something new on unacknowledged ruins. You need to first recognize what was lost. The third step is reparenting. This is the most transformative and the most difficult part to understand. Reparenting. It means becoming your own father and your own mother, giving yourself the unconditional love you never received. It sounds abstract, doesn't it? But it's actually very concrete. When you fail at something, instead of brutally criticizing yourself, you speak to yourself with kindness. You treat yourself as you would treat a child you love. When you have a need, instead of ignoring it, you acknowledge it and attend to it. You ask yourself, what do I need right now? And you really listen to the answer. When you feel a forbidden emotion, instead of repressing it, you embrace it. You say, it's okay to feel this way, and you allow the emotion to exist. And by repeating this process thousands of times, you rebuild from the inside what was lacking on the outside. The fourth step is shadow integration. Remember how your true self went into the shadow when you developed your false self? Integration means bringing those parts back, recognizing that the repressed anger is yours, that the buried sadness is yours, that the hidden vulnerability is yours. Carl Jung used to say that the shadow is not the enemy. The shadow is everything you are, that you can't accept. And when you integrate the shadow, you become whole. Not perfect, whole. The fifth step is conscious choice. Even after all this work, the old patterns will continue to appear. The conditional love complex doesn't disappear. It just loses power. But you'll need to make conscious choices repeatedly. Choosing not to seek validation when the pattern tells you to seek it. Choosing to treat yourself with kindness when the pattern tells you to criticize yourself. Choosing to exist when the pattern tells you to disappear. Each conscious choice weakens the old pattern and strengthens the new one. If this video has resonated with you, if you've recognized yourself in these words, you can give back in a way that creates abundance. The super thanks button down there, it's not just financial support, it's you saying that this truth about how families create narcissists needs to be known. It's you participating in breaking a generational cycle of unconsciousness. When you click on that golden heart, you're helping to spread awareness. You're contributing to other people awakening. You're becoming part of something larger than yourself. And it's the law of circulation that Carl Jung knew so well. Energy that circulates multiplies. Energy that stagnates rots. Now, I'm going to leave you with a practical exercise. Over the next 7 days, observe your thoughts when you fail at something. Observe the inner voice that emerges. What does it say? Whose voice is that? Is it yours? Or is it from someone who raised you? When you identify the voice, don't fight it. Just observe. And ask yourself, what voice would I like to hear in its place? And start building that new voice, word by word, day by day. That's the beginning of reparenting and the beginning of healing. The wound of conditional love is deep. It was created over years of repetition, and it won't heal in one night. But it can heal. Carl Jung spent his entire life showing that individuation is possible, that we can become whole, that the true self never dies, it just slumbers. And when it awakens, everything changes. You stop seeking validation in the wrong places. You stop performing to deserve love. You stop disappearing to avoid rejection. You simply exist. As you are, knowing that it's enough. Not because someone on the outside told you it's enough, but because you finally know, deep down, that it always was. Now tell me in the comments, which of the 5 forms of conditional love did you recognize in your family? Which one affected you most deeply? I read all the comments and I often reply, because here we are all survivors. We all carry wounds, and when we share, we heal a little. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Maybe it's the awakening that person needs. The generational transmission of trauma only breaks when someone wakes up, when someone becomes conscious, when someone chooses differently. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe it's now. The choice is yours.